So here I am again in the west of Scotland, and it's a kind of sleety, wet, snowy afternoon. Now, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos recently. Adam Gibbs out in British Columbia, Paul Thompson the other day in the northwest of England. And at this time of the year, the colour palette and the weather and the whole kind of being out in the wilderness can be a bit like this. Harsh weather, dull, overcast conditions. Now, if you recall, a few weeks ago I was making videos about being out in weather like this and what we can do. And something I've been thinking an awful lot about recently is looking at the landscape through the lens of imperfection. Now, we mirror the landscape and the landscape mirrors us. We find in it what we're looking for, whether we're bright, chirpy, optimistic and enthusiastic, or whether we're a bit morose and downhearted and miserable. And when you come into the landscape, if you allow it to resonate with you and you allow it to be itself without judgment, then we can find beauty in anything. I'm here in the most anonymous of woods. There's a forest trail has been pushed through here for some old logging, and this is the native birch forest that's left over. There's a few oak trees, and the colour palette in here is super saturated. Everything's wet, everything's kind of saturated with this moisture that's coming out of the air. But we've got this stark beauty of these beautiful white trunks and the purple branches and the kind of very muted yet colourful landscape that we have here. And I've just been spending half an hour just pointing my camera at things that catch my eye, imperfections and all. It doesn't matter whether it's harmonious or dissonant or perfect. This is just all language that is judgmental language. So forget it. See something that catches your eye and go with it. And I think if we allow ourselves to compose innately and by feel and with intuition, then we don't have to think about rules and guidelines. We can just think about enjoying ourselves, because I am enjoying myself. And it's truly, you know, some people would say it's quite miserable out here, but I'm having a lovely time. So let's have a look at some of the images, some of the compositions that I've kind of pointed my camera at, and let's see what else we can find. But yeah, bring it on. So here we are back in the studio, and I've selected a few images, not just that I made, but a couple that Anne-Christine has made, because what it does is it shows you the diversity of vision within a landscape when two people go and allow their innate creativity to just take over. Now, the thing I talked about when I was out getting wet was that it's this expectation of what we take into the landscape with us. And what I like to do when I go out into the field is to shoot what's there rather than what I hope is there. And by doing that, I'm never disappointed, because I don't go out looking for certain things. I don't go out looking for certain types of compositions. I'm just totally open to allowing the landscape to talk to me in its own voice and for me to listen. So if I have a look at some of these images, this was very much the first thing I saw, and it was probably why I got my camera out of the bag in the first place, which is the starkness of the white branches against the purple sort of smaller branches of the birch trees. And in this particular photograph, you can see the snow swirling around, and there's a lot of blurring and there's a lot of out of focus areas, and it's very dynamic and it's very challenging, but it's a very true representation of the energy and the experience of being there in the field. And compositionally, this doesn't really comply to many rules or guidelines. We've got three branches or four branches, trunks of trees going up on the right hand side there. The fact that they're on the right is somewhat counter to what normal convention would dictate, which is you tend to have things starting on the right, on the left and moving up to the right. This one doesn't really feel like that, and in fact it kind of leads you up to the top left, which is a little bit dissonant, but that dissonance is a function of the thing. So it doesn't have to be perfect and harmonious. Who says that landscape photography has to be perfect? Now, while I was filming snow blowing around in trees, Anne Christine went off and kind of did her own thing and found this beautiful, beautiful. This is beech leaves. These orange beech leaves are hanging on for the winter. For some reason, a lot of beech trees don't lose their leaves. And what she has here is she actually saw this from quite far away and positioned herself so that she could create a background of diffused conformality. She's managed to get the background completely covered in these birch bushes or birch trees, which has created this kind of homogeneous background, which is allowing the orange leaves of the beech tree to stand out and the stark white branches. Now, if we think about the things that make images successful, impact has to be very high on the list. Impact can come in many different things. It can be caused by the geometry of the situation, jaggedy shapes. If you think about lightning, lightning is jagged and dynamic. Broken fractal rocks are jaggy and dynamic. So in this case, those white branches are almost like the tree equivalent of lightning. The second thing we have is color contrast. Now, the orange leaves are beautifully harmonious with the sort of slightly purple background of the beech. Beech birch. It's all getting very confusing. But here we've got a very complementary color palette. Very stark, very dynamic, very dramatic, lots of contrast, lots of color, and honestly, Anne Christine, if you're listening, I wish I'd taken this because I'm really quite jealous. Now, this one again is another one of Anne Christine's, and it's a harder image to read, but it exhibits many of the same qualities, which is a harmonious color palette where everything is in that kind of purpley orangey warm zone. The starkness of the white branches stands out quite dramatically against the darker tones. And the other element that's noticeable in this one is the flakes of snow. As soon as you add moisture to an image, whether it's in snow or rain or mist or fog, that is an atmospheric element. And what we've added to this, if the snow wasn't in this photograph, it wouldn't be so engaging because it's lost an element, it's lost atmosphere. So we have contrast and color and dynamics and luminosity, and then the atmosphere is the icing on the cake, and that really helps. Now, while I was out there, because I allow myself to just respond to what catches my eye, there was a few things that caught my eye that weren't snowy trees. And the first of those was this, which is a pine tree that has been cut as part of the logging. And I just loved, again, the jagged starkness of this composition in the detail, the saturated wetness of it. There was just something strikingly beautiful about it. And if we go back to what we've just been talking about, we have dynamic geometry, we have angular motion. And it doesn't matter where that angular motion is leading us to in terms of the directionality of it. What we have is angular motion. And those jagged lines are dynamic and engaging. We have a color shift from the warm side on the left to a slightly cooler side on the right. And what that's doing is creating color contrast. So we have a warm to cool transition. The fact that that is a hard edge along our jagged geometry helps to emphasize one side versus the other side. And these images can also become a little bit like a yin and yang thing. It's like the positive and the negative. It's quite easy to bring in metaphors of life and spirituality into images like this. And this is just something I adore. It's the moment I saw it, I thought, oh, that's just a beautiful thing. And, you know, I was very, very happy to sit and point my camera at this for some time. And, you know, it's just a fascinating thing. And I think also it becomes a fascinating photograph. So it's not all about, there's no atmosphere in this one particularly, but there's a story because there's a human element incorporated into this, in that it was a chainsaw that cut this thing down. So there are metaphors in this too. Finally, the one last image is this, which couldn't be more different from the one before. And this was rain droplets. The sleet had turned to rain, and it was just dropping in a very small pool in the forest, just beside the track. Again, just a totally anonymous little, I mean, maybe, I don't know, a couple of meters square, something like that. So not a huge pool by any means, but getting right in there with a 70mm lens allowed to create these very abstract patterns, and the reflections of the forest and the sky into the pool, for me again created something that was just quite fascinating. Images like this, it doesn't matter if they're not tack sharp for my mind. It's an atmosphere. This is all atmosphere. And it's an abstract, and it can be blurry and out of focus, and I could even take in some Gaussian blur and make it even more abstract should I want to. So if we go and have a look at the kind of big picture, you saw at the beginning of the movie the weather conditions that we had when we were out there, and I think we've been very successful, not just in producing a short portfolio of work between the two of us that's somehow very representative of that time and place, but it represents our unique vision of that time and place. Neither of us went in with any expectations. We actually went there without our camera bags at all. We left them in the car, and we hiked up to the top of the hill, and we only decided to go back to the car and get our gear once we saw things that we thought, oh, wait a minute, we're starting to feel creatively aware of this landscape. And that's something I want to come back to in future videos, is this concept of creative awareness. So hopefully you found this useful. This is some concept that we'll be coming back to again and again and again on this channel. So hopefully you find these concepts useful, because they're super liberating. To be able to go into the landscape with an open mind and an open heart and a joyful and curious attitude will get you an awful lot further than going into the landscape with a set of compositional templates where you start looking for things. I can't think of anything else that will cause more frustration than that. If you found this useful, please subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up and hit the bell notifications. There'll be some more videos along next week, and we will leave you to it now. So thank you very much for watching. Have a great time, everyone. Bye-bye.